G'day, my name is John Nichols and this is Humans for Nature, the channel that looks at the interesting, the funny, the fun things and the very serious side of global warming. We will cover electric bikes and cars, renewables, solar, wind and all things that will help us control the greenhouse gases emissions in Australia and around the world. Now, in my last video I was answering a question about EV charging costs, telling the story of a 2,200 mile trip we did going down the east coast of Australia and to Melbourne, and then I'll use the inland route coming back. So what I'd like to do this time is include that and finish off with that, and then to tell you a story that happened to us at a supercharger in Gundagui. Quite an interesting and amusing story that happened there. Now, after leaving Melbourne, we had about 115 kilometres to Dalesford, and we were going to stay at a lodge we really love called Lake House, and it's a really nice place. We've enjoyed it in the past and we're looking forward to it again. But en route there I started to notice some unusual things happening with the electronics of my car, mainly to do with the battery charge rate, because usually when the battery goes, the charge goes down as the kilometres lessen. But what was happening in this situation was that the battery charge was decreasing a lot faster than the kilometres we were doing. So I was a little worried about that, but we arrived at Lake House, and there wasn't a problem there, of course, because they've got 2 destination chargers and that worked quite well. But the next day we were going to go slightly, as we headed north back towards Sydney, we were going to go west towards Bendigo, and we hadn't been there before and thought we might like to visit it. But with this little problem we were having, the trip from Bendigo out to Wodonga was about 290 kilometres, which if we were having problems might be pushing our luck. So we thought that maybe a better idea would be to head across country and head straight for the M31, and then you just turn north, and not very far up there is Euroa, which has its own supercharge, and that's only 185 kilometres from Dalesford. So we thought we'd do that to be safe. Now, our stay at this lodge where we were, and it's good. It's a great place and we enjoyed being there. The food is great, the rooms are lovely, and you've got views over the lake, and it's a treed area. It's a very pleasant place. Dalesford is a very pleasant place to be, and Lake House is a very pleasant place to stay. So the next morning we headed out and we headed for Roa. Now, when we arrived there, I noticed again the problems. I was still having the problems. The battery charge rate had gone down much lower than the amount of kilometres we'd covered. Now you can see this by looking. You can see this at there's a whole screen devoted to energy on the tester, which I find very useful and often refer to it, and that showed the same problem. So something was going wrong, we didn't understand it, so we didn't want to push our luck. So we went into Euroa and it was only a 20-minute charge to get it back up. And as usual in most of the superchargers, there's always toilets somewhere, and in this case across the road there was a park with a lake, and there was rest areas, and we went over there and had lunch for the 20 minutes it took to charge the car. Now our next stop, after leaving Euroa, we drove the 160 kilometres to the supercharger at Wodonga, and after being there, and that was successful, only took a short while to fill the car up again, so we then stayed at a nearby hotel. Nothing special, but it was clean and it was modern. Now over this few days I've been doing some calculations and realised that we were losing about 15% of our charge every trip. But that amount at the moment could be lived with, so that was fine. Well, our next stop, we booked into a beautiful, what we thought, we hadn't been there before, but we thought it was a beautiful fishing lodge, and we thought we'd book in there. We had, but that was about 35 kilometres east of the M31 when you got to Gundagui. So we just thought, well, hang on, this might be pushing our luck a bit. And the supercharger was 8 kilometres on the M31 north of Gundagui. So we thought maybe what we should do is not go directly to the lodge and then come back. We might be pushing out, especially because they didn't have a destination charger and we weren't sure they would want us to charge there on a normal 3-pin plug. We weren't sure of that, so we decided to go directly to Gundagui, and that's what we did. We went directly to Gundagui, and when we got there, of course we noticed the same problem. But I decided to, and it's a good spot. There's the supercharger there is directly behind Oliver's, which is one of these lovely eating places which does a lot of interesting food and healthy food, and there are several of them all around this place, and we enjoy going to them. So we were glad to see there was an Oliver's, but when we got there and plugged in, the car didn't charge. Now I thought, ooh, got really worried about that. I wonder if it's anything to do with this problem I'm having, or is it something different? Anyway, I pulled it in, pushed it back in, tried a few things, still wouldn't work. There's 2 other vehicles arrived and they're charging fine. But the charging bay next to me was empty, so I decided to move it. So I took it out and moved into the next one, and it still didn't charge. It wouldn't start charging. So at this stage, I was really beginning to get a little bit worried, but I had a phone number available. I think it's on the windscreen somewhere in the car, a number anywhere in Australia I could ring, and I did ring this number, and got a voice the other end, asked me the questions what I was looking for, and I told him the problem I had, and also that the problem I had, also the chargers, I tried to charge, they weren't working. And he said to me in this American accent, he said, don't worry, I'm in Utah, he said, and we'll look into this for you. And I can look at any charger anywhere in the world. He said, just give me a moment to know exactly where are you. And I said, well, I'm in a place called Gundagui. Gundagui, he said, that's a sweet sounding name, Gundagui, I like that, he said to me. And he said, let me have a look. Gundagui, New South Wales. Yeah, I said, oh, we got two bays out of action there. And there's 6 there. And I tried 2 of them, and they're out of action. And I started to chat to him, and I told him that he asked me about Gundagui, and I said, well look, it's famous. It's famous for this dog it's got on a tucker box. He said, tucker box? I never heard of that before. I said, well, yeah, that's all right, don't worry about the tucker box, let's try and figure this problem out. And he said, well, you try one of the others, they'll work. Now, with regards to your first problem with this thing, he said, I think, have you tried resetting the computer? I said, no, I've heard about it. He said, well, on your wheel, on your steering wheel, there's 2 buttons. He said, you press them at once, hold them for 30 seconds and the screen will go black, and then it'll come back on in 3 minutes and it'll reset the computer. I'd heard about this, I read a little bit about it, so I thought, well, let's try this, let's try it. So, after saying goodbye to him, I went back to got back in the car, and well, I was already in the car, of course. So I thought, well, let's have a look and see what's happening. So I moved the car and moved it to another empty bay, and it worked. Immediately it worked. It charged the car, and me resetting the computer, I've never had that problem since. So. It's interesting the way they look after their vehicles. It doesn't matter where you are, but you can imagine it's in Gundagui. They're going to knock. It's not going to be too easy for them to send someone to fix this up, because well, you either have to come from Melbourne or Sydney. I doubt if there's a service centre for Tesla in Canberra, which is a little bit closer. So it would be out of action for a few days. But anyway, we charged up, had a lovely lunch. We had already had lunch. It was a little like an afternoon meal at Gundagui, and it was a great place to stay. Our interesting episode in Gundagui, we then drove the 35 kilometres to Nimbo Fork Lodge, and we were not disappointed. The views from the villas of the Tumut River below us, and to the east was the beautiful views of the mountains. And if you drove further east, of course you come to the snowy mountains, which Australia is famous for, and also they are some of the highest peaks in Australia. Now, we enjoyed that lodge. It was really, really good. We enjoyed the food was great, the dinner was great, and we enjoyed the breakfast the next morning. And the main thing that we found interesting, or that wasn't essential to us, they were happy for us to charge the car outside our villa, where there was a gas heater. And they told us if we unplugged that, we could put a two-pin plug in, or we could put a two-way plug in, a socket, and then but we decided not to do that. What we decided to do is we'd have our showers, and then we'd plug in, and that would charge the batteries back up to full overnight. And the thing that was interesting with that was that it meant we didn't have to stop at Gundagui on the way back. We could go straight through Gundagui and go all the way to Melbourne, which is about 210 kilometres, and this will be our third visit, and it's another nice spot to stop. The charger backs onto a lovely park where, of course, there's toilets, and there's 3 restaurants come cafes, which we've tried 2 of them and really enjoyed them. And we thought it generally was a great place to stop. We had about 85 kilometres to drive to Mittagong, and we were booked into the Fitzroy Inn, which is a very old lodge come hotel. Hasn't got an active restaurant, but they have 2 destination chargers. And we went out that night, and we actually dined in Barrel in a beautiful French restaurant, so we were happy. The restaurant we dined that night, and we do enjoy French food, so we enjoyed that night. Now the next day we only had 150 miles back, or 50 miles, 150 kilometres back to Sydney, and that was easy. And then when it all finished, we really had covered 2,200 kilometres, and we'd spent a total of $98 at SuperChargers. Now, if you remember, 48 of that was in Richmond in Victoria, and it was because our friends, although they had the most beautiful unit below in the car parking, there were no 240 volt facilities in the car parking facilities, any of them. So that meant that $48 of that 98 was really spent. If they'd have had just a place to plug in, we wouldn't have spent that $48. So when you look at it, we only really spent, in the whole trip, we spent $50 on charging, which really is quite exceptional. It's funny, but I always tell friends, I used to tell friends, the one thing I'd like to do before I die is to own an electric car. And here I am, I've owned an electric car for 12 months. And what an amazing vehicle it is. I mean, you've also got to remember that on this whole trip round, big chunk of that, the Tesla did the driving, not me. I just sat there and had my hands on the wheel. I didn't do the driving, the car did it, and it did it very well, considering it's only been out a few years, but it kept up to date with that style of thing all the time. You're constantly getting updates, and I was thinking about that. I was thinking, what a joy for the future, for the youth of today and tomorrow. What have they got in store for them with the technology of electric vehicles? Petrol, diesel will be old hat, but for the future, they have a tremendous future with regards to electric vehicles, hydrogen, whatever you like to think. The future is there for them. We just must get control of global warming. If we can control that, get it right, then the youth of the future has wonderful things ahead of them. Okay, now that's enough of that. So just like to say, from next fortnight on a Wednesday, I'm going to continue on looking at a Tesla, some of the nice things and interesting things I've learned about it, just little things that I think add up and would make a good segment. And I'll also do a serious one in the next fortnight. So until then, I'd just like to say g'day and goodbye.